Our group's topic is secular ethics, and we'll be discussing its impact on Tibetan Buddhism as well as its significance today.
Secular ethics is the idea of educating people about inner human values such as love, compassion, justice, mindfulness, forgiveness, tolerance, and peace. Essentially, the Dalai Lama suggests that secular ethics is a method to educate both the heart and mind. He hopes that secular ethics will cultivate a global culture of living together as brothers and sisters and collaborating together to solve international issues such as global warming and the global economy. The Dalai Lama has also stated that religion can only help unify humans to a certain degree, but that secular ethics is necessary to unite us all, even atheists, because it allows us to bond over the fundamental values which make us human. He hopes that we can integrate secular ethics into primary education so that people are aware of our commonalities as humans from an early age and are able to adopt these values when solving issues later on. Ultimately, focusing on secular ethics would encourage people to work through conflicts with dialogue and not violence so that we can maintain peace for generations to come. Therefore, in secular ethics, it is important to recognize our innate human nature in order to eradicate separation or division that exists among us today.
When looking at the differences between religious ethics versus secular ethics, there are four main areas to look at, which are foundations, personal responsibility, authoritative texts, and arbitrariness. In terms of foundations, most secular ethicists agree that the foundations of all ethics comes through evolution, whereas in religious ethics, the claim is that moral rules people have, they've come to learn through cultural evolution that were predicted by God. In terms of personal responsibility, in secular ethics, there's a focus on doing good for the sake of just doing good, whereas in religious ethics, the moral realists tend to do good because they're instructed to be good by God, using heaven as their motivation and hell kind of as a deterring factor. And in terms of authoritative texts, religious texts can be kind of a source for what's good in religious ethics, whereas in secular ethics, the authoritative works change over time as a society adapts its views on what the cultural norms are. Plato also had an opinion about arbitrariness in relation to ethics, and he basically argued that if you follow an ethical rule because God indicates it is good to do so, then you're not truly being ethical. And the moral person would instead do that thing because it's good and not because God informed them that's good. And so this kind of mentality is saying that if ethics is based in religion, then ethics is ultimately meaningless. I found that I actually didn't agree with this quote just because I think that with religious ethics, it can be a mix between both, and you can have your own morals and they can be influenced or enforced by religion. But that doesn't make it meaningless necessarily. So I think that you can genuinely want to do good and still want to do it for God.
Moral instructions are included in Buddhist scriptures like the Pali Canon and handed down through tradition. The 5 precepts of Buddhism, for example, were practiced by the Buddha and are said to be the most important system of morality among Buddhist lay people. Although they seem to almost counter the idea of secular ethics, considering they appear to be a list of rules that one must follow, they are actually quite the opposite. These ideas ultimately help promote a mutual understanding and respect between those who are religious and those who are not. They are things that Buddhist people choose to follow not because they have to, but because they want to. No one is telling a practicing Buddhist that they must do these things in order to lead a good life. Essentially, the 5 precepts help ensure that nobody poses a threat to another person's life, property, family, rights, or well-being. Furthermore, they help create an atmosphere of trust, respect, and security. This is what His Holiness the Dalai Lama said is most important to focus on in life. He bases this idea on the fact that we should approach ethics based on universal principles rather than religious ones, which is what the 5 precepts introduce. Although some have compared the 5 precepts to the 10 Commandments in the Christian religion, I would beg to say that they are much more than simply religious principles. If one is not to abstain from one of these things, they are not going to be a sinner in the Buddhist eyes. In fact, there is virtually no place for sin in the Buddhist religion. Rather, they are set forth as a guideline to becoming a more harmonious, compassionate community of people.
Followers of Buddhism, including the Dalai Lama himself, have begun to preach the importance of secular ethics over religion in our daily lives. First and foremost, mindfulness is a theme that directly emphasizes the importance of secular ethics. as it dictates how we treat our environment and the other members of our environment. Through personal experiences and practices, the teachings of mindfulness in our daily lives seem really important towards success, both personally and professionally. In politics and business, we can see how misconduct among some of our world's most powerful leaders leads to war and suffering. So it is important to be mindful of our surroundings and actions with those we interact with every day in order to be respected and retain our humanity. Even in our families, maintaining relationships with the people you may not see every day is very important, as those will be the people who are there for you at the end of the day when there is suffering. Buddhism essentially has begun to emphasize this mindfulness over adhering to the teachings of individual religions, as mindfulness will make us more successful and happier people overall. And this is something we can agree with, especially because secular ethics is in itself a worldly belief, something that everyone can adhere to, unlike the scriptures or teachings that disagree among different religions. Secular ethics, however, is quite a difficult task to introduce to large populations, such as the Indian population, because many in countries such as India adhere very closely to their religions from birth, and with their busy daily lives have very little time to even consider others' opinions and beliefs. It seems infeasible to expect a massive movement away from traditional thought, but in a hypothetically perfect world that Buddhism preaches, there is possibility for universal peace, growth, and happiness.
The Dalai Lama's proposition of secular ethics is a radical view, in my opinion, that would be difficult to incorporate into today's culture. I believe violence and ultimately war is induced by other components of human nature that overpower these values and are deeply solidified within our culture. More specifically, we cannot simply get rid of our drive for competition and our instinctual need to satisfy our own interests, because they are largely biological. Perhaps if secular ethics were introduced at a young age, then the culture would shift. In my opinion, that would take a long time for any noticeable change in culture to occur. Additionally, with these conflicting interests, it is difficult to define what is objectively just or fair for everyone. Competition for resources is a natural process, and since there are not enough resources for everyone, allocation based on values of compassion would be problematic and not feasible in modern-day application with such a large population size. However, I do believe that if we focused on compassion for issues such as climate change, then we could observe impactful results. For example, if we focused on what is just, not only for humans, but for all sentient beings on this planet, then it would create a responsibility to make more of an international, collaborative effort to solve this issue. I think the biggest obstacle in adopting secular ethics for this issue is convincing people that it significantly impacts not only us, but all other organisms in our environment. Once we have overcome this using secular ethics, though, then we can make meaningful strides in eliminating global warming.
When researching secular ethics, we found some interesting connections to Hinduism, and there's this one speech that Dalai Lama gave in India that kind of expresses a lot of these points. He mentioned that the world population continues to grow, which leaves a lot of people poor, and so this gap between the rich and poor is morally wrong. And to deal with these things, we have to see each other as members of the same human family and have to trust each other. And this trust can be based on a sense of our all being the same as human beings. So I think this was important to think about, because with secular ethics, the focus isn't to appease God in this particular situation, but it's to be a good person and to treat everyone as the same, to kind of fix a common problem. At the speech, he also mentioned that the proper way to achieve peace of mind is to overcome our destructive emotions and cultivate positive ones. And so he mentioned that there's ancient spiritual traditions in India that have been doing this for years. And I think this was a direct contrast with religious ethics, because he was saying to think beyond only praying to God and look at making your mind more peaceful.
The Dalai Lama recently launched a secular ethics curriculum in which he preaches many different changes that he believes now are possible to bring peace among all diverse communities. Although he states that since we are in the 21st century and there's a higher focus on peace, we believe there will be aspects of certain religions that will always make it difficult to unite all under ideas of secular ethics. Personally, being born into a Hindu family, the history that exists with our Muslim counterparts in India still creates controversy among communities in India today, even though we are in the supposed era in which the Dalai Lama believes the complete focus on peace. It seems implausible that we could easily change many's way of thinking through the use of Dalai Lama's proposed curriculum. He believes that schools should be focusing a lot more on shaping students' hearts to drive them towards understanding more about human compassion and understanding. However, we believe that the growing focus on the individual in this era makes it very complicated for schools to steer away from material understandings and focus on emotional ones. The Dalai Lama does make very good points, however, when he says that more universal approach is necessary in bringing communities closer together, as religion has really only created divides on many important controversial issues. But it is definitely not as simple as he sets it out to be. His next focus is moving away from teachings of independence and personal struggles and towards focusing on interdependence and working together. We agree with him that humans work best when they are together and solve problems together, but we believe that one underlying factor that drives us to work apart from each other is competition. It takes a lot to live a healthy lifestyle in the world that we live in today, and doesn't seem plausible for us to expect every person to be able to work with every other person, especially with so much competition to get the best education, the best job, or have the best assets.